welcome back to Memory Lane. And this week, our destination is the OG original arcade Mario Brothers. All right, this was the introduction to what we know today as probably one of the best, if not the best, and probably the most iconic video game franchise of all time of Super Mario. Now, this was way before he was Super Mario. Well, not way before, but this was before he was Super Mario, and this was after Donkey Kong, which was the initial introduction to Mario. Now, this game here did have a little bit of have its contradictions to when it came to being published to home consoles, and we'll get to that point in here in a little bit. But furthermore, we're just gonna get into it. Now this game here, obviously, it's a Nintendo game. All right, it's the Mario Brothers. Now this is the Mario Brothers. So obviously, it is a Nintendo game. So it was developed and published by Nintendo, of course, back in 1983 for the arcades. Okay, now this was an arcade before we had it in our homes. Now the music I played was from the NES version. Okay, you could play this on the NES, and you could play it on the Atari. This was an Atari game as well. Now we're gonna get to that in a little bit. That's the contradiction. It was designed by Shigeru Miyamoto, the man that also designed Donkey Kong, and again the Mario. Okay, if it's well, this is not entirely true, but if it's Mario related, it's Miyamoto related. Okay, not every Mario game has had Shigeru Miyamoto fingerprints on it. Okay, it was the first of the Mario games. Okay, this is where Mario got his name Mario, and this is what kicked off the Mario franchise. And this was also the very first Donkey Kong spin-off. Okay, so the guy you play on Donkey Kong, that's quote unquote Mario. Of course, that wasn't his name in the game. His name in Donkey Kong was Jumpman. He got his name Mario because Mario was the name of an Italian American landlord who kind of barged into Nintendo of America and demanded the staff for rent money. So they named the character Mario, and then of course kicked off this game here. There's actually just a little bit side story to that. The thing is, like, this is a story that's been said that Mario was named after the landlord. That's 100% true because both stories say that. It's just the two different stories are how he got his name. So this one story that I just told says that he barged in demanding the rent. The other story is that was told was that because he was kind of a recluse. Like, you just never saw the guy. But either way it goes, whether which story is true, it's 100% true that it was named after that landlord, and that's how Mario got his name. So the big thing is with Mario, like, this is definitely one of the pioneers of platforming and probably what we know as platforming today. Now this is definitely an iconic game. Okay, and it was the debut of Mario with the name Mario, the debut of the Mario games, and was also the debut of Luigi, Mario's brother. Okay, we all know this. Now this was still back in a time where Luigi was just green Mario. Okay, he looked just like Mario, except everything was green instead of red. Luigi didn't get his iconic look until I think Nintendo 64, them days, maybe the GameCube, but it wasn't until then, the late 90s, early 2000s, okay? Anytime prior to that, Luigi was just green Mario. He looked just like Mario, it was just copy and paste color swap. That's all it was. And Luigi was strictly for multiplayer, okay? Even back then, Luigi was known as Player 2. Still to this day, we know as Luigi as Player 2. Of course, now you can play with him as whatever. Thanks to the Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube. Well, there was Mario was missing where you play as Luigi, but again, if you want to go based off that, he's still just Green Mario. And Mario's missing is not a multiplayer. So the enemies, there's a couple enemies in this game that we know of. So this is the game where there's platforms. Okay, so there's a bottom level, and then there's a tier above that, a tier kind of in the middle, and then a tier at the top. And then in the four corners, there's pipes. And what you do is you get these enemies. You have a turtle, a crab, and some type of bug, they have their names here. So the enemies, you have Shell Creeper, that's the turtle, Sidestepper is the crab, and then Fighter Fly, that's the bug. Okay, so it just kind of just hops around. And what you do is you got to get underneath them. So if they're on a platform that's above you, you have to get underneath them, below them, underneath that platform that they're on, jump up, hit the platform, make them flip upside down, and then get up to them and kick them off the screen. That's what you got to do. Okay, so this was before the iconic Mario mechanic where you just jump on them and squish them. That ain't become until Super Mario. This is regular Mario where you have to get underneath them, punch that platform, flip them over, jump to them, kick them off the screen. Okay. Now at the very bottom of the screen, right in the middle, there's two bottom platforms, is a POW block. Okay. And I think the POW block has 3 hits. I think you hit it 3 times and it disappears. But the POW block is good for when a stage gets harder and it's filled with enemies, because you do it one enemy at a time. Okay. So the POW block is like if the screen is littered with enemies, you hit that POW block and it flips them all over at once, and you have to get to them as quickly as possible. Because if you don't, they'll flip back over and they'll continue on. Once you get to the very last enemy, this is how you know that you have one enemy left. That last enemy will move faster and faster. So you go from like walking to running, and you have to move faster to catch it. So the pipes are not for Mario. Okay, this was the introduction of the pipes, but Mario didn't go in or out of the pipes. The pipes are strictly for the enemies that were coming in and out. So what you do is, the way you can get around, you can just jump platform to platform, up and down, or it has the wraparound thing. Like in Pac-Man, you go far enough off to the side, and you'll pop up on the opposite side of the screen. Okay, so if you're on the platform, you go all the way to the left, you end up on the right side of the screen. Okay, that wraparound that it does. Once you kick all the enemies off the screen, you move on to the next level. Okay. The big thing in this game, that if you listen to my Donkey Kong episode, I kind of ranted about this. They I guess they changed Mario's ability to fall from any height. Now, if you remember me talking about this in the Donkey Kong game, where Mario will fall just a little too far and he'll die in midair, you don't have to worry about that in this game. If you go from the very top platform, and you fall all the way to the bottom, he'll just land on his feet, just like the Mario we know today. It still pisses me off on how Mario would just sit and die in midair because he fell 2 inches too far. Luckily, you don't have to worry about that in this game. Now, it's not a very big area either. It's not a huge platform, so you're not really falling from that. But it's still, if it was still the Donkey Kong mechanics, you still could have died because you fell, 3 inches. I'm sorry, but that's just still pissed me off. So the multiplayer in this game, the multiplayer and other elements of this game, uh, were inspired by Joust. Now, Joust is another kind of classic arcade game. I may or may not talk about Joust because I never really played. I played it a couple times, but I never really, I really have nothing to say about it. Upon its release, Mario Brothers was initially labeled as the third game of the Donkey Kong series. So I'm trying to think. So you have Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., you have this. I think there's Donkey Kong 3, but I don't know if that was on arcades or not. But I know the other three I named were on arcades. So to kind of get to the contradiction that I said earlier, it's not really much of a contradiction, but it is if you're trying to be like a gaming purist or whatever. For home consoles, it came out on the Atari and the NES. So for home consoles, Nintendo had the rights to the Mario Brothers in Japan. Here in the US, Atari had the rights. So that's why, for any of you who played the Atari 2600 and you came across a Mario Brothers cartridge, that's why. They had the rights to the game in the US until eventually it came over here to America and we had it on the NES and arcades and, whatever how. The NES version, which was the most popular version because the NES was a very popular console, that version had sold about 2.28 million cartridges worldwide, while the Atari version has sold 1.59. So almost 2.5 million for Nintendo and a little over 1.5 million for Atari. That right there, it's kind of like duh, that Nintendo, because it's a Nintendo game, Nintendo platformer, which we all know that's what Nintendo got really popular with, was its platformers. Of course it's going to sell. Especially in those days, the NES days. The NES is what saved video gaming. So, yeah, it's going to sell more than Atari. Atari was cool, but Atari was on its way out. The video game crash was happening. Nintendo came out with the NES, and the NES sold like gangbusters back in the 80s. Okay, if you're a kid who played video games, whether you were born in the 70s or 80s, you had an NES. You had an NES in your house. If you didn't, I'm breaking shit. If you didn't, you had a friend who did, a relative who did. You had one at your disposal. There's no way in hell you can tell me you were born between the 70s and 80s and never had that fucking rectangular controller in your hand with the two buttons, A and B, and a D-pad. Playing Mario, playing Donkey Kong, Metroid, Castlevania. It. You did. You did. I wasn't even born then. And when I was a kid, I played Super Nintendo, and I did have an NES, and I played the original Mario Brothers. I didn't own an NES. Had a relative who did, but I did play it. This is a I remember the very first time I played this game. It was actually on the Game Boy Advance. So if anyone remembers with the Game Boy Advance, they had the Super Mario Advance series. I think there was 3 games, and you had Super Mario Advance, which had, I believe, Super Mario Brothers 2, and this was a game that was on it. So it was Super Mario Brothers 2, and then this one. So it was a cartridge that had 2 options, and then there was Super Mario Advance 2, that was Super Mario World, and this one, Mario Brothers. And then the third one, I think there was another one that was Super Mario Advance 3 that had Super Mario Brothers 3 on it, I believe. And this. So all 3 games had this as a second option to play. This was my first time playing it on the Game Boy Advance, because the Game Boy Advance, with the exception of the shoulder buttons, it was designed like an NES. Because the Game Boy Advance, it had Super Nintendo graphics, and it had good games on it, and I love the Game Boy Advance. I mean, but this was my introduction. So you got to think, it had D-pad and had A and B. That's it. The only difference is that it had shoulder buttons, L and R. You didn't need to worry about that for this game. You just need the typical buttons. So it was an NES controller, because it did have start and select as well. It was basically just an NES controller with shoulder buttons. You know. That was my introduction. I never played the Atari version. I've actually never played the NES version until I got my Switch and played it on, Nintendo Online, the NES Online. Never played the original arcade version either. So this is kind of like a hole in my retro gaming resume here that I never played the original uh, arcade port of this on an actual arcade machine. Uh, Arcade went up, man. You gotta do it. That's if they're still kicking. I heard this. There were some issues with them, but if they're still kicking, that's definitely one they got to do. This was definitely an iconic game. It was a breakthrough game, uh, along with Donkey Kong, because this is quote unquote the spinoff of that. It was definitely iconic and a breakthrough because this is what made Mario. This is what introduced Mario and Luigi. This is what introduced multiplayer platforming. This is what introduced the two most iconic characters in video gaming, and this is what introduced the most iconic face of video gaming, and of course, the face of Nintendo. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Super Mario because that's going to get its own episode. But if this game wasn't really successful, there may or may not be a Super Mario. They probably would have moved on. You know, Link, The Legend of Zelda, that could have been the face of Nintendo, and Mario could have just been a leftover IP. Mario could have got the Kirby treatment, or the F-Zero treatment, or the Star Fox treatment. Like we all know Kirby, and Kirby has a few games, but Kirby's kind of that younger sibling compared to Mario, and Zelda, as Metroid was that cooler older brother that kind of just poked his head out when he felt like he should have. And then Star Fox and F-Zero are kind of like the cousins you barely see. That's kind of how Nintendo does its IPs. But if it wasn't for this game and the success of it, Shigeru Miyamoto may or may not have said whatever with Mario and just moved on to something else. But this game had success. Shigeru Miyamoto knew exactly what he was doing. Look at the success of Donkey Kong, and of course this game came out, and this game was successful, and then which led to Super Mario. The success of that was insane. There's no doubt and no telling that this game made its money. It paid its dues. It earned its right, and it definitely etched its way into the golden age of arcade gaming. It etched its way into our homes of the NES library. It's a lot of people tend not to talk about this because like I said, you have Mario Brothers and you have Super Mario Brothers. But everyone just says, the Mario Brothers. So when you think Mario Brothers, you don't think this game that I'm talking about. You think the Super Mario Brothers. You think Mario and Luigi and Yoshi and Toad and Peach. You know, it. No, this game came first. This game came first. I didn't play it first. My introduction to Mario was Super Mario World, and you bet your ass that game is getting its own episode. But this game here, I want to talk about this first before I talk about those because if it wasn't for this one, like I said, those probably may not be here. You got to respect the OGs, man. You got to give them the flowers that they deserve. You know, Shigeru Miyamoto took the Mario Brothers and he ran with it. Hey, man, he ran far. Okay, so the Mario Brothers. If you want to talk Mario himself from Donkey Kong, you got to think. Then Mario's been around since 1980, 1981, and we're over halfway through 2026, and he's still here, still the biggest name in franchise video game history, the Nintendo franchise, and all that stuff. He's one of the most iconic and one of the most recognizable faces ever. Okay, not just Nintendo, not just video games, but ever. Okay, like there's rankings, there's lists, there's been studies that show that Mario is up there with Mickey Mouse, SpongeBob. Like he's one of the most iconic cartoon characters. Bugs Bunny. Like he's up there with all those guys. He's up there. I think he's battling first place with Mickey Mouse as the most recognizable and most iconic cartoon slash animated character in media. You know, and it all started right here. Shigeru Miyamoto knew exactly what the hell he was doing, And if he didn't, boy, did this guy hit a home run. I tell you that. If he was shooting in the dark with this game, and because he needed another platformer to kind of build off the first one he made, Donkey Kong, and if he was shooting in the dark, man, he struck gold. There's no way in hell you cannot say he struck gold. Look at the Mario games. They're still making Mario games. He's still producing Mario games. He's still with Nintendo with his fingerprints on this and his input on that and his name on this. He's still active. Mario is still active, and I don't think they're going to go anywhere. It is kind of a bold statement to say that would Nintendo survive without Mario? Mario was what built Nintendo. Sure, nowadays they have Zelda and Pokemon to kind of help bring Nintendo to the front, but people love Mario. They're going to want Mario. All right. And it all started here. It all started here. This is where, so this was the introduction of the pipes, like I said earlier. This is where they kind of made Mario the plumber, okay? Because before, I think he was just a construction worker, I think that's what it was, in the Donkey Kong games. And they changed him to a plumber. And then it's been a plumber ever since. And he's been the face of the company ever since. And he's been the leading franchise ever since. I mean, as rudimentary as this game is, this is a good game, because it's not like an oh my god, this is a great game. Like, it's a good game. It's a pick up and play kind of game, kind of a brain rot kind of game. It's a good game that anybody can play. Okay, just all right, jump up, hit the platform that's an enemy is standing on, and then kick him off of it. That's it. Don't get hit because you'll die. Uh, I can't remember. I didn't see in the research, and I personally don't remember how many lives you get. I don't know if you get 3 or 5. I know in like regular Mario, I think Super Mario, I think it's 3. Because I know Super Mario World, you start with 5. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't feel like looking it up either. But all I can say is that there's just no way you can be well. Let me reiterate that. Because like you may not know this game existed and you're considered a retro gamer, but you cannot be like a Mario diehard and just not know where it came from. Okay, this is the grandfather of Mario games. Okay, then you got Super Mario Brothers. People, that's where Super Mario started. That's where the name started. But that's the the franchise itself, the Mario Brothers itself, started there on the arcades. And personally, I don't think they kind of should. I mean, because some of these enemies have made a comeback. Like the turtles, the shell creepers. We know them now as Koopa Troopas. You know, and the crabs. You'll see crabs every once in a while. But the fighter flies, though, I don't remember ever seeing those. I haven't played every Mario game, so I I can't say for a fact they never came back. But I personally haven't seen, at least in the games that I've played. But the POW block has been there since 1983, and we know the POW block has always been there. As far as other stuff, they didn't come until later, until Super Mario. Okay, he became Super Mario because of the stuff he can do. He can jump on enemies and squish them. He can get power ups, like eat a mushroom and get big, or eat a flower and shoot fire from his hands. That's what makes him Super Mario. This is just Mario Brothers, a plumber in New York City who, fighting off enemies, turtles and crabs and flies that come out of the pipes. I personally never played and to tell you the truth, I never realized this game came out on the Atari until I saw a video on YouTube about someone who had the complete Atari 2600 set, and I saw Mario Brothers was in there. And that's when I realized that it kind of was a split decision that Atari got the U.S. Mario Brothers and Nintendo got the Japan Mario Brothers until it came over here to the U.S., of course. But that's interesting. Like, I wonder Because there was kind of, sorta, a such thing as exclusives, but it wasn't as like serious as it was until we got until like the 16-bit days, like the Genesis and Super Nintendo. That's when exclusives started actually meaning something. Sega had Sonic and Nintendo had Mario, but like Mario on Atari, Donkey Kong's on Atari, you know, but then you have Pac-Man on Nintendo. You have Galaga on the Nintendo. These arcade ports that came to Atari. Some of these were done by Namco. Some of these were done by Atari, Bally, Midway, all that. Of course, with Midway came Mortal Kombat, but Mortal Kombat was on every console because it was such a popular game. This game was a Nintendo game that was on Atari, and it was popular on Nintendo. It sold the most copies. It sold almost 2.5 million. Like I said earlier, I couldn't find exactly how much money the game made, but I'm sure it made a lot. I'm sure it made a lot of fucking money to make as many copies and ports and how many units it sold and cartridges and to kind of kick off this franchise that it has. This is what Shigeru Miyamoto is known for. This, Mario is his baby. This is the birth of his baby right here. Okay, that's something you can't take away from that man, no matter what you say. But there's so many things I can say about this game before I get repetitive, so I'm probably just gonna cut it here. Uh, but like I said, you gotta pay respects to the OGs, man. You just have to, because without them, there wouldn't be the games we know today. For those of you who follow my YouTube, sorry about not uploading a video the past couple Thursdays. I know I upload like full length videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and sometimes over the weekend. Uh, I've been kind of busy working on a big project. So if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Kevin Gill Gaming, I've been kind of hinting at some big projects that I'm going on, and I'm really excited about this. I don't know how far I'm gonna get with it, success wise, but I don't plan on being on top of the world. I just plan on this something I'm doing on the side to kind of just help get more involved with the community and stuff like that. So be sure to follow me on my socials, Facebook and Instagram at Kevin Go Gaming, to kind of keep up with the progress on my project before I release it. Be sure to follow my Reddit r/gaming memory lane. I'm trying to build a community over there, so we just talk about games and kind of get involved with the community, and maybe people over there can give me suggestions on what I should cover, because I have a list of games I'm going to cover, but if a game gets popular demand, I'll cover that first. Power to the people. And same thing with my YouTube, man. Shout out to my YouTube. Having a lot of fun over there, man. I love the comments. I love the likes and the shares and all the love I'm getting on all that stuff. The views, it's insane. You know, creeping up on 130 subscribers. Onward to 200, man. Subscribe and like my videos. I'm having fun. Right now I'm doing a playthrough of Simpsons Road Rage. That's a lot of fun. That's a very boy, that's a game. All right, it's not like, if for those of you who never played Simpsons Road Rage, it's a fun game, but it's not like very intricate. And it's like there's so much you can do before it's just like you're doing the same thing over and over again. But it's still a fun game. You got to check it out. We're having a good time over there. And again, stay tuned. Stay tuned for what I'm putting out, man. I'll probably tell the podcast, but Instagram and Facebook is going to see it first. All right, y'all. I'm out.